Hi, it's time for an unboxing video. So I've got a package here that was delivered a few days ago. It's an item that I bought on eBay. It's kind of an unusual item, so I thought I would wait to open it up and let all of you folks watch. Go ahead and cut it open here. I asked them to package it carefully so it wouldn't get damaged, and they said they would. And it doesn't seem too bad. They use some of this bubble air pack stuff, and it's got cardboard around the edges to protect it, and it looks like they did a reasonably good job. So what do we have in here? We'll do what we always do, we'll just throw that on the floor. And what we've got inside is, wait for it, box goes on the floor. We've got a NuTone Model 2542 master station. So let's do a quick visual inspection to make sure that it's not broken. The thing you worry about the most when people ship something like this is it gets banged around in the box and the edge of the faceplate or something gets smashed into and it gets broken. This one seems like it's in good shape, so they did a good job packaging it. It's got the wall housing on the back of it, which is important, and apparently when it was taken out they just simply cut all the cables off here and left the remnants inside. The other thing that's important when you buy something like this is not only do you need the wall housing, but you also need the terminal board and switch block assembly, because without those two parts, if you were going to install this, you can't. You need those kind of parts. Recently, I was working with a fella who's building his ultimate man cave, and he wanted to install a NuTone master station and 2 remote speakers, mostly for music application. He's going to tie his music sources into it. One of the things that I pointed out to him was that there were 3 models that he was looking for, and he said, well, you know, I look on eBay and they're on eBay, and you know, it seems like there's a lot of them available. And it's like, yeah, but do they have wall housings? Because what typically happens is, with, let's take this unit as an example, somebody's remodeling their house and they're not going to keep this, so they take it out of the wall, they unplug it, they keep the master station because obviously they think that has some value, but the wall housing, it gets thrown in the dumpster. And without the wall housing, how are you going to install it? You really can't. It's important if you're looking to do a vintage installation that you get everything, because if you don't, you'll be missing out. A 2542 is actually a fairly rare NuTone Intercom master station. It came out in 1970, or it could possibly have been the end of 1969. It's a little hard to tell exactly. The first time it shows up in a NuTone catalog is in 1970. It would have only been made from 1970 when it was introduced until the end of 1973, because in 1974 all the new IM series came out. So these earlier models, the numbering designation for the model numbers changed and everything became IMs. So a 2542 is an AM/FM room-to-room intercom with built-in cassette player recorder and a built-in clock with timer. And this was the first time that NuTone ever made a master station that had a cassette player built into it, or a player recorder. And also, it was the first model they ever made that had a clock. The clock has a built-in timer, which we'll talk about. The 2542 is a variation on the model 2540. Here's an example. This is actually a NuTone 2541. So the difference between a 2540 and a 2541 only has to do with the color of the faceplate. The 2541 had the eggshell colored faceplate. This one has discolored quite a bit. What you have here is AM/FM radio with room-to-room intercom. And you'll notice that if you look at this section of this unit, this section of this unit, you'll notice they are identical. And this is the very first time that NuTone started a new concept in design, which was take a basic fundamental design like this and enhance it by adding extra features to it and create a newer, better, fancier model. These models all belong to a family of intercoms. They're not really the 2000 series, but they all have 20 something in the model numbers. So you have like 2063, 2064, you have 2090, 2091, 2540, 2541, and then the 2540 42. The very best way to learn a little bit about our 2542 is to take a look at the NuTone catalog. So this is a NuTone Intercom catalog from 1970. You'll see the 2542 is featured here on the cover with this very attractive gal in her 1970s wardrobe. Built-in AM/FM intercom Musicom center. So a 2542 is a Musicom center because it's music and communication, and that was the very first time that they used the term Musicom. If we flip it open, this is a rather tattered catalog, but if we flip it over, you'll notice that the first thing on the inside of the cover is the model 2071, which is a stereo music intercom system, and you would kind of expect that because at that moment that was sort of the top of the line model that they made. And if we keep flipping, here we have the model 2090, 2091, which you'll notice here looks a lot like our 2540 and our 2542. On this page it shows all the accessories and speakers that you could get to go along with it. And if we flip it again, we have the 2063, 2064. There's also the model 2034. 2034 is an AM only model version of the 2063, 2064. I have never actually seen one of these. There's always been some question whether or not they actually made those, or if they did, maybe they didn't sell very many of them. We have accessories here and here and here. On page 6 we have an ultra rare item. This is a NuTone Model N2200. The N2200 is a surface mounted stereo music center. It's not an intercom system. It has a modified 2071 master station, which is AM/FM stereo with you could either get a cassette player or an 8-track player and a fold-down record player. I, again, have never seen, they only made this for a few years. I've never actually seen one of these in real life because I don't think it was very popular for what it was. And if we flip here on page 8, we have our 2542. And here it says new, exclamation mark, CommuniCenter, cassette radio intercom system with message center and clock timer. And now from the world's leader in music intercom systems, this completely new concept in system versatility and convenience. An outstanding 6-wire centralized FM/AM music intercom, new monaural cassette player recorder, plus new automatic clock timer has been combined in a handsome master station to provide features never before available in a ready-to-install system. So in this close-up view, you can see the cassette player more clearly, or I should say player recorder. What you have here is you have a single control knob, and to play or record, you push it up, and to stop it, you pull it down like that. It does not have auto stop. And there's actually a service bulletin that came out when this model was relatively new, advising people that when you play cassette tapes and it reaches the end of the tape, you should shut it off right away. Otherwise, it can damage the cassette tape or the cap spin roller down here. And then later on, that was included as sort of a bulletin in the installation instructions. For fast forward and rewind, you move the lever this way or this way. There's a record button here, so if you want to record off the radio or off the auxiliary tape input, or it could be a phonograph also, or leave a voice message, you would push this in and then press this up like that. When you push the button up, it automatically turns on and runs the tape. You have the capstan roller here, you have the playback head here, and you have the erase head here. And then you have here, you have this little shiny stainless steel or aluminum plate here, which sits behind the coils of tape in your cassette, and that way you can see them more easily. So down here is your message center controls. If you're going to leave a voice message, you move this to record message, and it pushes this knob over also, and this is a little neon light that kind of flickers, so when the kids come home from school, they're supposed to see it, and then they can rewind the tape and listen to mom's message, and of course that never happened. That's part of the CommuniCenter idea. This fundamental design would be carried through on all NuTone intercoms that had cassette player recorders all the way through the end of the 5006 series. So in these, in the 313 series, in the 4006 series, and in the 5006 series, they all had voice message recording features, and again, no one ever used it that way. Up here you have a recording level adjustment. This does not have automatic recording levels, so to know how to set this correctly so you're not overdriving your recording, down here, well, it's a little hard to see, you have a little VU meter, and there's a needle that sort of moves back and forth as you play the music off the radio and you're recording it or leave a voice recording, and then you turn the knob to keep the needle in the green zone and not go into the red where you're overdriving it. This was a nice little feature that they included. It wasn't so much maybe NuTone's idea to have this, because this whole cassette player assembly was not actually made by NuTone. It was actually made by Sony. Like most companies, NuTone didn't design the cassette players in any of their intercom systems. They were always made by another company. It would have been a commercially available cassette assembly, in this case from Sony, and then you could buy the basic cassette assembly from Sony and you would design your product to accommodate it and fit in, and this was done. Later on in the 313 series, the cassette players assemblies were all made by Panasonic, but this is the only one that was made by Sony. I was actually once in one of these sort of antique mall kind of places, and there was a booth, and they had a lot of stuff for guys, it said, and they had, you know, tools and older electronics and portable radios and all that kind of stuff, and they actually had a Sony cassette player. It's one of those little portable, what we used to call a schoolhouse recorder that you could carry around, and it actually had controls for the cassette player like this, and it was a Sony. So it was maybe not the same model exactly, but pretty close. This is a close-up of the clock on the 2542, and the clock assembly was actually made by General Electric. It's very similar to clocks that you find on General Electric ranges and stoves from the same time period. It is a fairly full-featured sort of clock assembly that gives you some extra functionality on your 2542. It has standard clock arrangement, hours, minutes. It has a revolving second hand, and the little white pointer down here is for like an alarm timer. To set the clock, you push the right hand knob in and turn it counterclockwise to set the time. It only goes in one direction. You can't go back if you go past it, so be careful when you set it. To set the timer, you push it and turn it clockwise, and it moves the right hand to whatever your timer setting is. And then you might be able to see there's this little curvy area on the face of the clock, and it has a red indicator. It's a 4-position switch. If you turn the right hand knob without pushing it in, you can change the different settings. In the top setting, it's auto radio alarm. What you can do is you can set it to turn the radio on at the preset alarm time. At that time, the radio will turn on automatically. Of course, you have to have the system turned on. You have to have it tuned to a radio station and have it on either AM or FM. And about 10 minutes after the radio turns on automatically, the mechanical buzzer on the back of the clock will activate, and it'll buzz annoyingly through all the intercom stations, and it buzzes for about 10 minutes until someone turns it off. So it's sort of a wake-up alarm kind of thing, I suppose. Then you can turn the knob and move it down to auto radio off, and then you set the left-hand adjustment. So there's a timer indicator, little blue numbers and hash marks on the face of the clock, and you can turn this knob to correspond it. There's no pointer on the clock face, it's just the pointer on the knob, and you can adjust it from 0 to 60 minutes, and then the radio will play for that amount of time, and then it will shut off automatically. Then you can move the right hand knob to the off position, that's the third position, and it turns the radio off on the system while it's still turned on, but the intercom and the tape will still work. Not sure exactly why that's necessary, because if you want to leave the system on all the time but not hear the music, you would typically just move the selector switch down at the bottom, up into the tape position, and then if you're not playing the tape, there's no audio. But I have a feeling that it's a standard GE clock arrangement, so they worked within what was available, and it sort of duplicates the feature, so it's not really that big of a deal. And then the last position at the bottom is on, and basically it just enables the radio, so it works like a radio music intercom system. Again, it's a little bit of a duplication, but they were working with the clock design as it came. I don't think they would have wanted GE to make them a special clock because it would have been too expensive. So down on the bottom, it's your same basic layout as you have on a 2540. You have both AM and FM tuning dials, and you have separate tuning knobs. This one's for the FM and this one's for the AM. So you could tune the two favorite stations that you listen to all the time and then switch between them by moving the selector switch here. You have AM, tape, and FM. There is also an auxiliary jack on the back of the unit where you could plug in a record player or some other device. I'm not sure what other devices you had in 1970. I suppose an 8-track player maybe, because NuTone did make fold-down record players and fold-down 8-track players, so that could be tied in also. And then you have your system volume control and tone knobs here, and your master speaker volume knob here. And like a lot of them, these are really hard to turn at this point. And then you have your intercom switches. You have door, talk and listen, and inside talk and listen with your 10 room control switches. These switches adjust room by room how your remote stations will operate. There are 3 position switches, so when they're in the upper position, that station is in the listen or monitor setting. If you move it to the center, it turns that station off. And if you push them down, which is where they are in most people's houses, those stations all both have radio and intercom. So it's a pretty standard design. One of the other nice things they did with this was they improved the knobs on this model to give it this overall look. And these are actually, see if we can get one of these off. They get stuck really easily. No, that one comes off. These are actually plastic on the inside, but have formed metal, aluminum probably, on the outside, and the ones that have an indicator, which would be the system volume and the master speaker volume, they have a little orange dot to show where it's set at. And the way they do that is there's a little hole punched out in the aluminum, and then there's a little bit of dab of orange paint on the black interior part of the knob, and then when you put it together, it shows through. It's a nice touch. It's more expensive of a knob than just plastic knobs are, but it gives it a really cool, more modern look, because after all, it was 1970. It was the future. So let's go ahead and open it up and see what it looks like on the inside. There are 4 screws that hold it to the wall housing here, 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 and here. And we'll go ahead and take these out. Again, it's another small thing that you need if you were trying to do a vintage installation of one of these, is you need the mounting hardware and the mounting screws. And those things, unfortunately, lots of times get tossed out because people don't think about that when they're taking a system out. And that's unfortunate. You would be surprised at all the people who call me wanting to know, have you got screws for a 2540? And it's like, no, not usually. So these are just about 1 inch long, more like wood screws with oval heads on them. I'm sure you could find something at the hardware store that would work. And then we can lift this out, and it's already unplugged from the terminal block. So there's this blue plug connector here, and it plugs into this white connector here in the switchboard terminal block assembly. And I have a video that shows how to uninstall a 2542. So I'll put one of those pop-up tags up here somewhere that you can go to if you need to see how to do that. One of the things that's interesting about this design is this wall housing. This is the power socket up here. So this is where the 110 power from the house comes into, and then it has a cord with prongs on it that plug into this socket. And the reason they did it that way, I think, was because you needed a more specialized low voltage transformer to run all of this. They didn't want to make one that you had to mount separately, because you would have had to run a whole bunch of wires between it and the master station to power it up. This is our wall housing. And you can see here, this house looks like it had let's see. It looks like it had all 9 stations, or maybe 10. It's a little hard to see because there's so many wires, but oh, we can count the cables. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it had 9 remote stations plus a front door. And this is the remnants of the antenna cable. This is not a standard NuTone antenna cable. This is much heavier, which is more better. And then the antenna connection is up here. The terminal block here is where it's a 6-wire system. So you've got your black pair, orange pair, red pair, and that's where all of these wires are connected. And then you've got your switch block assembly here. It's pretty standard wall housing, just larger than average. And then you have these mounting clips here, 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 and here that the screws through the faceplate plug into. So this is the back of the 2542. So what you have here is the power lead that plugs into the 110 socket in the wall housing runs up and feeds this low voltage transformer, which has a variety of different outputs to it. This little board right here, this is the power supply board for the cassette player. The cassette player has audio cables that plug in and go down and are wired into the selector switch here and into the voice record board down here. Got a 5-inch 45 ohm speaker cone. This is the back of the clock timer assembly, and this little tab right here is a tab, that's the buzzer for the alarm on the timer. Fairly primitive, but pretty standard for the 70s. And then the rest of it is pretty much your dead standard 254142 design. You've got your intercom switches here, on-off volume and tone control, master speaker volume, your main board, which is your amplifier, power supply, AM tuner, and then your FM tuners inside the can. This is all very standard. This particular unit was actually made in 1972, so it's a couple years into the production. And one of the things that changed over time, and I'm not sure whether the change would have happened when this came out in 1970 or slightly before that, there was a variety of different power transistors. This is the output transistor for the amplifier, and the earliest models of the 2541, 42, and the 2090, 2091, and those, they used a different transistor, and according to the service bulletins in those days, they were somewhat of a problem, and then they were discontinued by the manufacturer, and then there was another one that they used in production, and then I think either that one was a problem or it was discontinued also, and then finally this version of a Texas Instruments transistor was used. There are some differences on the circuit board. Some of the values of the components change as these output transistors change. If you were updating or repairing a unit with a really early output transistor, you have to make some changes on the board so it would work correctly. So it's a pretty straightforward but full design. There's a lot going on in here. Let's go ahead and take the cassette player, the cover off of it, and take a quick look at that. So there are 2 RCA cables here. The red one is the output and the black one is the input, and we'll unplug those. It's kind of stuck a little bit. We'll have to give it a little persuasion, I guess. There we go. Okay, so we'll unplug that, and then this shield, there's 3 screws that hold it in place, and I believe the purpose of the shield is most likely just to keep dirt and dust out of the mechanism. It's not to shield it electronically or electrically because there's no ground on it. So here we have the inner part of the cassette player assembly. So in the close-up of the cassette player assembly, there's a lot going on in here. So inside this metal encased area is the motor that drives it. And then down here, this is a flywheel pulley. And then you've got an idler pulley here and another drive wheel pulley down here. And as you may be able to see, there's all of this black gooey stuff. It's not so gooey anymore. It's actually dried up quite a bit. Let's see if we can get a little bit of it scraped off here. So this little bit of black stuff here, that's the remnants of the belts. So these take 2 belts. There's a long belt that goes around the pulley on the motor. It goes down around here and then around this one and then back up to the motor. And then inside there's a little tiny belt. It's only like maybe less than an inch around, and that's what drives it. And what happens on cassette belts is over time, the material that they're made out of, whether they're some kind of synthetic or natural rubber, I'm not sure, over time they dry out and degrade and stretch, and eventually they turn into this sort of black tarry stuff that gets all over everything. So that's a problem. Repairing the cassette players on these is problematic because of the lack of parts, but we'll get to that in a second. So you've got the motor, the idler pulley, a drive wheel here, the flywheel pulley here. This little board is the speed control board for the motor, and there's actually a procedure that you use to set this. Although in today's world, the easiest way to do that is you use a calibration tape that has a 10,000 hertz sine wave on it. You play it, and then you hook it up to an oscilloscope and you adjust it, and I've shown that in other videos. And then here you have the audio board for the playback and the record, and your RCA jacks here. It's a pretty well designed cassette player. I think it was probably better quality than a lot of the ones they used later on. So as for servicing these, it's very difficult because, one, finding belts nowadays for cassette players is difficult. A lot of products don't use belts much anymore, and the companies that made the belts, a lot of them don't make them any longer, and all the belts are made overseas, as they probably always were. The companies that import belts, they don't sell a lot of belts anymore, so they don't have a lot of incentive to have belts on hand. So finding belts of the correct size is difficult. Also, figuring out the size of the belt is difficult. There isn't anything in the service literature that says what the size of the belt is. It just gives you a NuTone part number because you would just order belts from NuTone. Drive belts come in a variety of different configurations. There's square ones that are big, square ones that are small, there's round ones, there's all different sizes, and then there's all different lengths, and you have to have the right amount of stretch, and if it's too big it doesn't work correctly, and it's very complicated. And then the other thing that happens with these is this little drive wheel right here has a little rubber wheel on it down here where it's kind of hard to see, and these rubber wheels, the material dries out and sometimes they crack and chunks of it fall out, or it cracks and splits so it doesn't go all the way around. The rubber drive wheel was a part that you used to be able to buy. It was not commonly available, but if you knew where to look, you could find them. But those sources seem to have all disappeared. And if this is broken or damaged or dried out to the point it doesn't have any grip anymore, it's really very difficult to deal with. And also, for those of you who think, oh, I could get an O-ring and put an O-ring on there, and that doesn't work. We've tried all those kind of things. It's very difficult. The other thing, which is really hard to show in here, is that down underneath all of this, and I'm not going to take this apart to show you because it's too complicated to do, there's actually, it's sort of a clutch assembly. So if the tape, for instance, if you play the tape and it reaches the end of the tape, and it does, since it doesn't have auto shut off, the motor keeps running and the parts keep turning, which puts stress on the tape itself. However, you don't want to burn up the motor or cause problems like that. So there's sort of a clutch assembly that allows a certain amount of slippage when that happens, so the parts keep going and it doesn't burn up and damage things. The problem with the clutch assembly is the clutch material, and it's a lot like a clutch in your car, for those of you who know how that works. The problem is the clutch material is basically, it's like a round disc of felt. I suppose when it was new, it had enough grip to the surface that it achieved its goal, because when everything is spinning and you're playing a tape, it has enough friction to allow everything to turn, but when the tape stops, it has enough slippage to let things turn enough but not burn up everything, and those kind of problems. And what happens over time is the surface of the felt discs become like polished and super slick, so they don't have enough grip, so when you try to play a tape, they slip more than turn, and then the tape doesn't play correctly. That's not a part that you can replace. They're just simply not available. There are no Sony parts for any of this. It's just too old. You know, this is like 52 years old now. That's a real problem. So unfortunately, It's a really, really difficult thing to try to repair and make work reliably. We tell people that when they have these and they want to send them in. This is not a super common model because it was very expensive back in the day and they only made it for a few years, so they are somewhat rare. So that's it. That's sort of a general unboxing and overview of a NuTone Model 2542 AM/FM cassette player recorder CommuniCenter master station. Nice model, one of my favorite from an appearance point of view models that NuTone ever made. It just has a really nice sort of classy look. If this was all washed and cleaned up and you get the dirt and dust and everything off of it and clean up the knobs and all like that, it's a great master station. And this one actually is in very good condition. I didn't really point out too much, but the inside is fairly clean for as old as it is. That just makes it that much better. I hope you found this interesting, and maybe for someone it will be helpful. If it is, give it a thumbs up on YouTube because that helps us just a little bit. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications, and every time we post a new video, you get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.